Chief Adebayo's world was one of wealth and walls, until his quiet maid arrived with her secret twins. Soon, the billionaire who shunned laughter finds his heart unlocked by two small voices, and a love he never saw coming. Hello, bestie. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. Chief Adebayo, Bayo Adeyemi, was a man carved from granite and solitude. His vast Ikoyi mansion was a monument to his success, a cold, echoing gallery of priceless art and silent staff. At 60, he was one of Nigeria's wealthiest men, a titan of industry with a fearsome reputation. But his wealth was a fortress, and he had built the walls high, especially against the one thing that reminded him of his deepest regret: children. He had never married. A long time ago, a youthful error, a woman he loved who left, had sealed that part of his heart. The sound of children's laughter wasn't a joy to him. It was an accusation of a life not lived, a fatherhood never experienced. His housekeepers, drivers, and gardeners all had strict instructions. Their families were never to visit. The mansion was to remain a sanctuary of silence. The rain in Lagos had a personality of its own. It wasn't the soft, forgiving drizzle of Port Harcourt. It was a torrential, assertive downpour that hammered against the corrugated iron roofs of the taxi and turned the streets into rushing brown rivers. Amaka Nwachukwu pressed herself against the worn vinyl seat, her one good suit, a navy blue pencil skirt and matching blazer, feeling both constricting and desperately fragile. In her lap, she clutched a worn leather folder containing her life's credentials. A degree in business administration from the University of Port Harcourt, now feeling utterly useless, glowing recommendation letters from past employers in Port Harcourt, and her NYSC discharge certificate. The most important document, however, was a creased photograph tucked into a hidden sleeve. Her twins, Kenechukwu and Kanyanachi, their smiles wide and oblivious, taken on their last birthday. Looking at it sent a familiar, sharp pang of love and anxiety straight through her heart. The taxi spluttered to a halt at imposing wrought iron gates. A uniformed security guard emerged from a booth, his face stern under a crisp cap. Amaka rolled down the window, the humid air rushing in. "Good afternoon. I am Amaka Nwachukwu. I have an interview with the house manager," she said, her voice striving for a confidence she didn't feel. The guard consulted a clipboard, gave her a thorough once-over, and nodded. The gates swung open silently, revealing a driveway that seemed to stretch on for eternity, lined with perfectly manicured hibiscus and flamboyant trees. The mansion that came into view was not a house. It was a fortress of wealth, a modern architectural marvel of glass and pale stone. It stood stark and silent against the gray sky, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Compared to the vibrant, noisy compound shed shared with her late husband Chaik, this place felt like another planet. She was met at the colossal double doors by a severe-looking woman in an immaculate gray dress, who introduced herself as Mrs. Chitty, the house manager. Her handshake was brisk, her eyes missed nothing. "Follow me. Try not to touch anything," Mrs. Chitty said, her voice low and clipped. The interior was cool and echoed with a profound silence that was heavier than the rain outside. Their footsteps were swallowed by plush, cream-colored carpets. The walls were a gallery of abstract art and stark modern sculptures that Amaka couldn't begin to understand. The air smelled of lemon polish and emptiness. They didn't go to a kitchen or a staff room. Instead, Amaka was led directly into a vast study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held leather-bound volumes that looked untouched. Behind a massive desk of gleaming dark wood sat Chief Adebayo Adeyemi. He didn't look up immediately, finishing his notation on a document. Amaka stood awkwardly, feeling Mrs. Chitty's disapproving gaze on her damp shoes. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were not unkind, but they were deeply weary and carried an air of absolute authority. He was older than Shed imagined, with threads of silver in his close-cropped hair and a sternness etched into his features that spoke of a lifetime of command. "Miss Nwachukwu," he began, his voice a deep baritone that filled the quiet room. He glanced at her CV. You come highly recommended from the Lawson family in Port Harcourt. They say you are honest and hardworking. Thank you, sir, Amaka said, her voice barely above a whisper. The role is live-in. The duties are extensive. The upkeep of this residence is non-negotiable. My privacy, he said, leaning forward slightly, his gaze intensifying, is paramount. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. There is one rule above all others, Miss Nwachukwu. It is not flexible. It is not open for discussion. Do you have children? The question, so direct and loaded, felt like a physical blow. Amaka's breath hitched. The photograph in her folder seemed to burn against her thigh. For a terrifying second, she considered the lie. No, no children. It would be so easy. It would secure this job, this lifeline. But the image of Keen and Kanye's faces, their trusting eyes, flashed before her. She could not erase them. She could not deny their existence, even for a chance at survival. Yes, sir, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. I have twins, 5 years old. Chief Bayo's face closed off immediately. He leaned back in his chair, a clear sign of dismissal. Mrs. Chitty let out a barely audible sigh. Then I am afraid this will not be possible, he said, his tone final. Children are disruptive. They are not permitted on the premises. This is not a suitable environment. The hope that had carried her through the grueling journey began to drain away, leaving a cold dread in its place. This was it, the last chance. She thought of the daycare fees she couldn't pay, her mother's ailing health, the looming rent. Sir, please, the words tumbled out, fueled by desperation. They are very well behaved. They are in school. You would never see them. They would never be a disturbance. I have no other options. The raw plea in her voice was undignified, but she was past caring. Chief Bayo studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the pride warring with it. He saw the honesty in her eyes when she admitted to having them instead of lying. He glanced at her CV again, at the degree from a good university. A qualified woman, reduced to begging for a maid's position. A flicker of something, not compassion, but perhaps a calculus of need versus convenience, crossed his face. He needed a competent staff member, and good ones were hard to find. He steepled his fingers. The rule stands, Miss Nwachukwu. They are never to set foot in this house. They are never to be heard. They are never to be my concern. Is that unequivocally understood? Amaka's heart, which had plummeted to her feet, soared again. It was a brutal condition, an impossible tightrope to walk, but he was giving her a chance. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. Thank you, sir. The words rushed out in a grateful torrent. You will not regret it. See that I don't, he said, his tone leaving no doubt about the consequences. He nodded to Mrs. Chitty. She can start on Monday. As Mrs. Chitty led her back through the silent, gleaming hallway, Amaka's mind was already racing, spinning plans and lies, figuring out logistics of daycare and secret pickups. She had the job. She had an income. But as the heavy front door closed behind her and she stepped back out into the relentless Lagos rain, the weight of the promise she had just made settled on her shoulders like a lead cloak. She had just agreed to make her children invisible. The weight of Chief Adeyemi's rule was a stone in Amaka's stomach all weekend. The joy of securing the job was entirely eclipsed by the terrifying logistics of her new reality. She had won a lifeline, but its rope was woven from a single, fragile thread. A secret that could snap at any moment. On Sunday evening, she sat on the thin mattress of her rented room in Ajij, her children sleeping soundly on either side of her. Ken's arm was flung over her waist. Kanye's head was nestled in the crook of her neck. In the dim light, their faces were peaceful, angelic. She traced the curve of Kanye's cheek, her heart aching with a love so fierce it was painful. How could she explain to them that they had to become secrets? That their laughter, their very existence, was now a forbidden thing? Mama? Ken's voice was drowsy. Are we going to the big house tomorrow? Amaka's breath caught. She hadn't realized he was awake and had been listening to her conversations with her cousin. She smoothed his hair. Yes, my love, but it is a very quiet house. The man who lives there, the Oga, he does not like noise. Connie stirred, her large eyes blinking open. Is he a giant? She whispered, a mix of fear and fascination in her voice. Amaka managed a weak smile. A gentle giant, but a very busy one. So we must be like little mice. Okay? Very quiet mice. We can be quiet, Mama, Keen said, his small face serious with the gravity of a promise. We'll be the quietest mice in Lagos. The next morning, the reality of the promise began. Amaka's day started at 4:30 a.m. She dressed in the dark, then woke the twins, bundling them into their clothes while they were still soft with sleep. The first leg of their journey was a packed Danfo bus from Ajij to the mainland. The twins wedged between her knees, their small backpacks holding a change of clothes and a few quiet toys. Their destination was not the gleaming Ikoyi mansion, but a different world entirely. A makeshift daycare run out of a cramped 3-room apartment in a bustling, noisy compound. It was called God's Promise Daycare, but the promise felt thin. The walls were stained, the toys were cracked and old, and the kind but overwhelmed proprietor, Maman Kechi, looked after a dozen children of various ages. It was all Amaka could afford. She knelt before Keen and Connie, straightening their uniforms. You will be good for Maman Kechi? You will listen. They nodded, their eyes wide as they took in the chaotic, noisy room. It was the antithesis of the silent world she was taking them to later. I will be back at 4 o'clock, she said, kissing each forehead, her heart tearing as she left them there. From there, she took another bus to the island, arriving at the Adeyemi mansion just before 7 a.m. Her first day a tightrope of exhaustion and nerve-wracking precision. Mrs. Chitty was a strict overseer. She outlined Amaka's duties with military efficiency, the specific polish for the hardwood floors, the exact angle for the cushions on the stark white sofas, the temperature for washing the chief's expensive agbatas. The house was even larger and more intimidating than she remembered, a labyrinth of rooms that demanded absolute perfection. She worked in a state of heightened anxiety, her ears straining for any sound from outside, her mind constantly on the clock. At 3:30 p.m., with her tasks finally completed under Mrs. Chida's critical eye, she was granted a 1-hour break before preparing the chief's evening meal. This was the window. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she practically ran to the bus stop, the journey back to the daycare feeling infinitely longer than it was. She collected the twins at 4:15 p.m., Maman Kechi giving her a tired smile. They were good. Connie is a sharp one, always counting everything. The journey back to Ikoyi was the most dangerous part. She couldn't bring them through the main gate. Instead, she got off a stop early and walked to a quiet, overgrown service lane she had identified days before. There, hidden by a large bougainvillea bush, was a small, rusted gate used by gardeners. It was supposed to be locked, but the latch was old and loose. With a firm jiggle, it gave way. Remember, Amaka whispered, holding a finger to her lips as they slipped through into the vast, manicured backyard. Quiet as mice, they scurried across the open lawn, staying close to the hedges, until they reached the safety of the servants' quarters at the very back of the compound. A small, separate building much plainer than the main house. Her room was a simple, Spartan space with a single bed, a small table, and a shared bathroom. For 2 hours, this 10 by 12-foot room became their entire world. They whispered. They drew on scraps of paper. They built towers with the few blocks she had brought. Amaka would watch the clock, her stomach in knots, listening for the sound of the chief's car arriving at the main house. Every creak of the floorboards, every raised voice from the main house, made her jump. She lived in a state of perpetual fear, her senses stretched to their breaking point. The twins, sensing her tension, mostly obeyed, their games conducted in hushed tones. But they were children. A ball would roll too hard against the wall. A squabble over a crayon would escalate into a hissed argument. Every tiny noise was a potential earthquake that could bring her entire world crashing down. As she put them to bed on that first night, Crammed together on the narrow bed, Connie looked up at her. "Mama, why does the giant not like children?" Amaka kissed her forehead, her throat tight. "He is just lonely, my love, and he has forgotten how to play." She lay awake long after they fell asleep, listening to the profound silence of the compound, broken only by the hum of a generator. She had the job. Her children were safe for now. But she had never felt more like a criminal in her life, the weight of her secret a constant, suffocating presence. She was their mother, their protector, and now their jailer, hiding them away in the shadows of a palace. The next 2 weeks settled into a grueling, nerve-shredding rhythm for Amaka. Her life became a meticulously orchestrated performance of duality, a constant dance between the pristine, silent world of the main house and the cramped, whispered reality of her quarters. Her days began before dawn. She would extricate herself from the tangle of small limbs on the narrow bed, her movements silent and practiced. Dressing in the dark, she would leave the twins sleeping, a note with a drawn heart left on the table for them to find when Mom and Ketchy's assistant came to collect them at 7. The walk to the bus stop in the pre-dawn chill felt like crossing a border into another country. The main house was a temple of order. Mrs. Chitty was a relentless high priestess, her eyes missing no detail. A single dust mote on a picture frame, a watermark on a gleaming chrome tap, a cushion plumped a degree off-center. All were met with a silent, disapproving stare. Amaka learned the specific grain of the wood to follow when polishing, the exact pressure to use on the vacuum to not disturb the profound silence, the way to fold Chief Bayo's newspapers so the creases were razor-sharp. She worked with a quiet efficiency that even Mrs. Chitty couldn't fault. But her mind was never truly on her work. It was a clock, ticking down the minutes until 3:30 p.m. It was a radar, scanning for any sign of the chief's unexpected return. The sound of a car engine on the driveway would send a jolt of pure adrenaline through her, freezing her in place until she could identify it as the gardener's truck or a delivery van. The 1-hour break was her daily mission. It was a frantic race against time. The bus to the daycare, the collection of the twins, the furtive journey to the service lane, the anxious jiggling of the rusty gate latch, the hurried dash across the open lawn. Every day she expected to be caught. Every day, the relief of closing the door to her quarters behind them was so potent it left her weak-kneed. The quarters became a world of hushed secrets. They developed a language of whispers and hand signals. A raised finger to the lips, "Be quieter." A cupped hand to the ear, "Listen, is that a car?" The twins, initially confused, began to treat it as a grand, ongoing game of hide and seek. "Are we still hiding from the giant, Mama?" Keen would ask, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. But the strain showed. Their little bodies, accustomed to running and shouting in their Port Harcourt compound, grew restless in the confined space. Amaka saw the frustration in the way Connie would sometimes scrunch up her drawings, or in the way Keen would kick listlessly at the leg of the bed. She tried her best. She brought home discarded cardboard boxes from the kitchen, and they built fantastical forts that filled the small room. She taught them quiet games. I Spy, counting the flowers on the faded wallpaper, telling them stories of Mommy Wada and the tortoise in a voice so low they had to huddle close to hear. The fear was a constant, low hum in her veins. It was in the way she flinched when a plate clattered too loudly in the main kitchen. It was in the way her heart would stop whenever Chief Bayo's deep voice echoed through the compound, even if he was just speaking to his driver. It was in the nightmares that plagued her scant few hours of sleep, dreams of the chief throwing her and her crying children out into the rain, of Mrs. Chitty's cold stare of triumph. One afternoon, the precarious balance almost tipped. Keen, chasing a paper airplane, stumbled and knocked his head against the small table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. A moment of stunned silence was followed by a sharp, involuntary cry of pain from him. Amaka's blood ran cold. She scooped him up, clamping a hand gently over his mouth, her own breath held. She stood frozen, listening, her entire body tensed for the sound of footsteps, for Mrs. Chitty's sharp knock on the door. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The only sound was Kanye's frightened whimper and Ken's muffled sobs against her shoulder. No one came. The main house remained silent. Slowly, agonizingly, she released the breath she was holding. She rocked Keen, whispering soothing words, checking the small bump already forming on his forehead. The crisis was averted, but the shock of it reverberated through her. The margin for error was zero. A child's cry, a moment of normal childhood clumsiness, could cost them everything. That evening, after the twins had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Amaka sat on the edge of the bed, watching them. The weight of her decision felt crushing. She was providing for them, yes. They had food, a roof, and a chance at a better school one day. But at what cost? She was teaching them to hide, to make themselves small, to equate their natural exuberance with danger. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, followed by another. She cried silently, the way she did everything now, without a sound, her sorrow just another secret to be contained within these four walls. She was their mother, but in this gilded cage, she felt more like their warden, guarding them from a world that had no place for their laughter. The shadows they lived in were beginning to feel less like a hiding place and more like a prison. Chief Adebayo Adeyemi moved through his world with the assured, solitary rhythm of a deep-sea creature in its own pressure-filled domain. His focus was absolute, his attention reserved for billion-naira contracts, market fluctuations, and the intricate chessboard of his various business empires. His home was not a place of life. It was a meticulously curated asset, a silent sanctuary designed for one purpose: his rest. Yet, lately, a subtle dissonance had begun to intrude upon his perfectly orchestrated silence. It was nothing he could quantify, nothing he would ever deign to mention to Mrs. Chitty or the staff. It was a series of faint, almost imperceptible impressions that lingered at the very edge of his perception, like a scent he couldn't identify or a note of music played just outside his hearing range. The first incident occurred one evening as he was reviewing a contract in his study. The house was in its usual state of profound quiet, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the soft tick of the antique clock on his mantelpiece. Then he heard it. A faint, high-pitched giggle, so brief and delicate it could have been the squeak of a polishing cloth on glass or the cry of a distant bird. He paused, his pen hovering over the document, and listened. Nothing. He dismissed it, attributing it to an auditory trick played by his tired mind. But the impressions persisted. A few days later, walking from his garage towards the main house, his sharp eyes caught a flash of color near the hibiscus bushes that bordered the servants' quarters. It was a small, bright yellow toy car, the kind from a cheap cereal box. He stared at it, frowning. It was utterly alien in his landscape of manicured green and tasteful stone. Annoyed, he assumed one of the gardeners had been careless, perhaps bringing a child to work against the rules. He made a mental note to have Mrs. Chitty issue another stern reminder. The most disconcerting sign was discovered in the soft earth of a flower bed beside the quarters. He was taking his evening walk around the property, a habit he maintained for solitude and light exercise. There, pressed into the dark soil, was a perfect, tiny handprint. Next to it, another, and a small, chaotic scuffle of marks that spoke of a brief, playful struggle. Chief Bayo stopped dead. He stared at the prints. They were undeniably those of a very small child. A cold wave of irritation washed over him. The new maid, the one with the twins. She had lied. She had defied his one, non-negotiable rule. His first instinct was to storm into the quarters immediately, confront her, and fire her on the spot. But as he stood there, the fading evening light casting long shadows, his anger was tempered by a strange and unwelcome curiosity. The handprints were so small, so vulnerable. He tried to picture the child who made them. Were they the boy or the girl? What were they doing, playing here in secret? He found himself thinking of the woman, Amaka. He remembered the raw desperation in her eyes during the interview, the pride warring with her need. He remembered her degree, her obvious intelligence, now reduced to this, hiding her children in the dirt. He didn't confront her. Instead, he found himself doing something utterly out of character. He used the tip of his shoe to gently scuff out the evidence, erasing the tiny prints from the earth as if they had never been there. The signs kept appearing. A forgotten, half-eaten biscuit tucked behind a potted plant. The faint, sweet smell of children's shampoo in the laundry area, a scent entirely separate from the sharp, clean perfumes of the household products. Once, he was sure he saw a small, curious face peeking out from a second-story window of the quarters before it instantly vanished. He began to notice Amaka herself more. The permanent, faint shadow of exhaustion under her eyes. The way she would sometimes startle at a sudden noise, her body tensing as if expecting a blow. The way her gaze would often drift towards the quarters when she thought no one was looking. A silent, worried calculation happening behind her calm exterior. He never heard full-blown noise. He never saw the children directly. It was a ghostly presence, a life being lived just parallel to his own, separated by a pane of glass and his own inflexible rule. One night, unable to sleep, he stood at his bedroom window, which offered a distant view of the quarters. A light was on in one of the rooms. He saw Amaka's silhouette pass by the window. Then he saw her bend down, and a moment later, she was holding two smaller silhouettes, one in each arm, rocking them gently. It was a silent pantomime of motherhood, an intimate scene he knew he was not meant to see. He turned away from the window, a peculiar tightness in his chest. The signs were no longer just irritants or evidence of disobedience. They were becoming proof of something else entirely. A mother's love, a desperate struggle, and a resilience that was quietly, persistently, challenging the cold foundations of his world. The silence of his house now felt different. It wasn't just empty. It was expectant, holding its breath, waiting for something to break. It was a Tuesday, and Lagos was being washed clean by a torrential downpour. The rain hammered against the tinted windows of Chief Bayo's bulletproof Range Rover, turning the world outside into a blurred, gray watercolor. His flight from Abuja had landed early, and the traffic, for once, had been merciful. He was home by 5:15 p.m., a full hour and 45 minutes before his usual time. Usman, his driver, held a large black umbrella aloft, shepherding him from the car to the sanctuary of the front door. The house was, as always, impeccably silent. Mrs. Chitty appeared, taking his briefcase and his damp coat with her usual efficient silence. "The new contracts are on your desk, sir," she said. "I've taken the liberty of having your tea prepared." "Thank you, Mrs. Chitty," he murmured, his mind already half on the documents awaiting him. He moved towards his study, but something made him pause. A strange restlessness took hold of him. The rain, the early return, the oppressive silence of the house. It all felt suddenly stifling. Instead of turning left to his study, he turned right, walking down the long corridor that led to the back of the house, towards the glass doors that opened onto the patio. Perhaps he would just look at the rain-swept garden. The downpour had eased to a steady drizzle. As he neared the doors, he heard it. Not a faint giggle or a whisper, but the clear, uninhibited sound of children's laughter. It was followed by a voice, a woman's voice, Amaka's voice, but not the quiet, deferential tone she used with him. This was playful, full of warmth. "Keen, no. The alien queen doesn't like suya. She prefers chin-chin." Chief Bayo froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. The sound was coming from directly behind the servants' quarters, near the large old mango tree. They weren't even hiding inside. They were in his compound, defying him so brazenly it felt like a personal insult. The cold, familiar fury rose in him, swift and absolute. This was the height of insolence. He had given her a chance, against his better judgment, and she had spat on his one condition. His jaw tightened. He would fire her this instant. He would have Usman drive her and her noisy brats to the bus stop himself. He strode across the patio, his Italian leather shoes sinking into the wet grass, ignoring the drizzle that spotted his expensive suit. He followed the sound of the laughter, his footsteps silent on the sodden lawn. He rounded the corner of the quarters, his expression a mask of thunderous authority, ready to deliver his verdict. And then he stopped. The scene before him was not one of brazen defiance. It was one of pure, unvarnished joy. The twins, a boy and a girl, were crouched under the large mango tree, its thick leaves providing a partial shield from the rain. They weren't just playing. They were fully immersed in a world of their own creation. A large, discarded cardboard box from the kitchen was their spaceship. The boy, Keen, was wearing a colander on his head like an astronaut's helmet. The girl, Connie, was brandishing a spatula as a ray gun. They were so engrossed in their game they didn't see him at first. Amaka was there too, sitting on an upturned bucket, watching them with a smile that transformed her entire face. It was a smile he had never seen before, radiant and free of worry. For a moment, Chief Bayo was utterly disarmed by it. Then the boy looked up. His eyes, large and bright, widened not in fear, but in frank curiosity. He pointed a chubby, accusatory finger. "Mama said the Oga is a giant. Are you the giant?" The question was so absurd, so devoid of the fear and deference he was accustomed to, that it completely short-circuited Bayo's anger. He stood there, a 6'2" titan of industry in a rain-spotted suit, being addressed by a 5-year-old astronaut with a colander on his head. Before he could form a response, the little girl, Connie, chimed in with the impeccable logic of a child. "Do giants like suya? We like suya." She held out a slightly grubby plastic toy as if offering him a taste. Amaka's face had drained of all color. The radiant smile was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. She shot to her feet, her body instinctively moving to place herself between him and her children. "Oga, sir. I can explain. Her voice trembled, all her carefully constructed composure shattered. But Chief Bayo wasn't looking at her. He was still looking at the children, at their fearless, curious faces, at the ridiculous colander, at the cardboard spaceship that was so at odds with the cold perfection of his world. The fury that had propelled him here evaporated, leaving behind a void of stunned confusion. He had expected to find a nuisance. Instead, he found a scene from a life he had never known. He ignored Amaka's stammered apologies. His gaze was fixed on the boy. "What?" he heard himself ask, his voice strangely neutral. "Is Suya doing in a spaceship?" It was all the invitation they needed. The fearlessness returned to Ken's eyes. "The aliens are hungry," he declared, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We are astronaut chefs. We have to deliver the Suya to the planet." Planet Zuma. Connie finished with gusto, waving her spatula ray gun. And just like that, they launched into an elaborate, chaotic explanation of their interstellar culinary mission. Chief Bayo stood in the drizzling rain, listening to a detailed account of the alien queen's preference for chin-chin and the evil robot's attempts to steal the peppered meat. He didn't fire Amaka. He didn't say a word to her. He just stood there, a silent, towering figure, as the two tiny astronauts explained the rules of their universe to him. And for the first time in 40 years, a sound that was almost a laugh, a rough, amused chuckle, escaped his lips. The crack in the granite had finally split wide open. The journey from the mango tree to the main house was the longest walk of Amaka's life. Chief Bayo had not uttered a single word. After that strange, almost laugh had escaped him, he had simply turned on his heel and strode back towards the house, his silence more terrifying than any shouted command. He didn't look back, didn't tell her to follow. He simply expected it. Amaka, her legs trembling, managed to whisper to the twins, "Stay here. Do not move. Do not make a sound." Their little faces, once bright with adventure, were now pale and confused. The game was over. The giant's true nature had been revealed, and it was one of cold, silent wrath. She followed him, her head bowed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Each step across the wet lawn felt like a march to the gallows. Mrs. Chitty, who had been waiting in the hallway, took one look at the chief's stormy expression and Amaka's ashen face and discreetly vanished. He led her not to the kitchen or Mrs. Chitty's office, but into his study. The room that had been the site of her hopeful interview now felt like a courtroom. He walked around his massive desk but did not sit. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, watching the rain streak down the glass. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Amaka stood just inside the door, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, waiting for the axe to fall. She could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his fists were clenched at his sides. "I gave you one rule, Miss Nwachukwu." His voice was low, devoid of the earlier hint of warmth, and all the more deadly for its quiet control. It wasn't a shout, it was a verdict. One simple rule. "Sir, I—" Her voice was a broken whisper. "I had no choice. The daycare. It closes at 4. I have no one." He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her words die in her throat. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, deep-seated disappointment that felt somehow more personal, more painful than rage would have been. "Do not," he said, each word a shard of ice, "insult my intelligence by claiming you had no choice. The choice was simple. Adhere to the conditions of your employment or decline the position. You chose to deceive me. You chose to bring chaos and disobedience into my home." The word chaos struck her like a physical blow. Her children, her beautiful, well-behaved children, were chaos to him. The last vestiges of her composure crumbled. "They are not chaos, sir," she said, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "They are children. They are 5 years old. They whisper. They draw. They try so hard to be quiet for you." Tears she could no longer hold back began to stream down her face, but she made no move to wipe them away. "What was I to do? Leave them on the street? They have lost their father. Must they now lose everything because a man who has everything cannot bear the sound of their laughter?" She knew she had gone too far. She was jeopardizing any chance of a reference, any chance of a graceful exit. But the dam had broken, and the fear and exhaustion of weeks came pouring out. Chief Bayo watched her, his expression unreadable. He took in her tear-streaked face, the defiant set of her jaw even in her despair, the raw maternal passion in her words. He had expected cowering, pleading excuses. He was not prepared for this dignified, furious grief. His eyes flickered over her shoulder, back towards the window, towards the quarters where the two chaos makers were hiding. He thought of the tiny handprint in the mud. He thought of the colander helmet. He thought of the word giant. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Amaka braced herself for the words. "You're fired. Pack your things and get out." But they didn't come. He let out a long, slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. The image of the woman before him, fighting for her children with a ferocity he had to admire, was overriding the image of the disobedient employee. "You will listen to me now," he said, his voice still firm, but the ice had thawed slightly. "The rule stands. This is not a creche. My home is my sanctuary." Amaka's heart sank completely. This was it. "However," he continued, and the word hung in the air, a tiny lifeline. "However, I am not a monster who would see children left on the street." He paused, choosing his words with precision. "They may remain in the quarters, but they are your responsibility. Entirely. They are not to be seen near the main house. They are not to be heard from the main house. Their presence is to be invisible. If I see them, if I hear them, if they cause any disruption whatsoever, the consequence will be immediate. Is that unequivocally understood?" Amaka stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. He wasn't firing her. He was reaffirming the impossible arrangement, but now with his explicit, albeit grudging, knowledge. It was a stay of execution, not a pardon. The tightrope remained, but he was now watching her walk it. "Yes, sir," she breathed, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and overwhelming relief. "Thank you, sir. You will not regret it. They will be invisible. See that they are," he said, his tone final. He turned back to the window, dismissing her. "You may go." Amaka all but fled from the study, her legs weak. She stumbled out into the hallway, leaning against the cool wall for support, gasping for air. She had survived. They had survived. Back in the study, Chief Bayo remained at the window. The rain had almost stopped. He could see the faint light from the quarters window. He replayed the scene under the mango tree, the astronaut chefs, the offer of suya. A strange feeling settled in his chest. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't even resignation. It was anticipation. He found himself wondering what interstellar mission the astronaut chefs would be on tomorrow. The corner of his mouth twitched upwards. The reckoning was over, but something new, something entirely unexpected, had just begun. The morning after the reckoning, Amaka moved through her duties in the main house like a ghost. Every sound she made, the clink of a glass, the swish of a mop, seemed amplified, a potential provocation. Mrs. Chidis' usual sternness felt more pointed, as if she knew of the transgression and was waiting for the slightest misstep to report it. The mansion felt less like a workplace and more like a minefield. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs all day, a rhythm of fear and a desperate, fragile hope. Chief Bayo's words echoed in her mind. They may remain. They are to be invisible. It was a paradox. He had seen them and in doing so had made their secret existence both more precarious and more secure. She was living on borrowed time and she knew it. When her break finally came, the frantic race to the daycare and back felt even more fraught. Ushering the twins through the rusty gate, she repeated the new, stricter rules like a mantra. You must be quieter than ever. The Oga knows you are here. We must be like little mice, even more than before. Ken's face fell. But he laughed, Mama. I heard him. That was surprise, Amaka said, her voice tight. We cannot surprise him again. Now inside. Quickly. The hours in the small room were tense. The twins, sensing her anxiety, were subdued. They whispered over their drawings, their play lacking its usual exuberance. Amaka jumped at every sound from the main compound. Her nerves stretched to their breaking point. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Chief Bayo to change his mind. At 6:30 p.m., the familiar sound of the Black Range Rover arriving at the main house sent the usual jolt of fear through her. Shoo! She hissed, holding a finger to her lips. They all froze, listening to the distant slam of the car door, the faint murmur of voices. Silence resumed. Amaka let out a shaky breath. Perhaps he had forgotten. Perhaps he would simply ignore their existence. Then, 20 minutes later, a new sound came. Not the expected footsteps of Mrs. Chitty, but a different, heavier tread on the gravel path that led to the quarters. It was slow, deliberate. Amaka's blood ran cold. She peered through the slats of the window blind. It was him, Chief Adebayo Adeyemi, still in his impeccably tailored navy blue agbada, was walking purposefully towards their building. He wasn't looking at the main house, he was looking directly at her door. He's coming, she whispered in a panic, her mind racing. Was this it? Was he coming to evict them after all? Quick, hide the toys. Sit on the bed. Be quiet. The twins scrambled, their eyes wide with a fear that mirrored her own. They sat rigidly side by side on the edge of the narrow bed, hands in their laps, like prisoners awaiting a judge. A firm knock sounded on the door. It wasn't angry, but it was authoritative. Amaka smoothed her simple dress, took a deep, shuddering breath, and opened the door. Sir, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Chief Bayo stood there, an imposing figure filling the doorway. His gaze swept past her, into the small, sparse room, taking in the two children sitting stiffly on the bed, the few cheap toys hastily shoved into a corner. His expression was unreadable. He didn't speak for a long moment. The silence was unbearable. Then he looked at Keen. The mission, he said, his deep voice neutral. To planet Zuma. Was it a success? Did the alien queen receive her? Chin Chin? The question was so absurd, so utterly unexpected, that Amaka could only stare. Keen, emboldened by the reference to his game, forgot his fear for a moment. The robots tried to stop us. He blurted out, then immediately clapped a hand over his mouth, remembering the command to be quiet. But Chief Bayo didn't seem angry. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his eyes. Robots, you say? That is a serious security breach. What is your protocol for that? Connie, unable to contain herself, jumped off the bed. We use the ray guns. Pew, pew. She mimed shooting her spatula. I see, Chief Bayo said, nodding gravely as if receiving a critical intelligence briefing. And are your ray guns set to stun or to dispose of? The twins launched into a complicated explanation of their ray gun settings, their whispers gradually losing their nervousness, becoming more animated. Amaka stood by the door, watching the surreal scene unfold. The mighty Chief Adeyemi was standing in her shabby quarters, discussing interstellar security protocols with two 5-year-olds. After a few minutes, he cleared his throat. A spaceship made of cardboard is insufficient for such dangerous missions. He looked at Amaka, not with anger, but with a strange, awkward kindness. There is a proper football in the storage room by the garage. It is of no use to me. It might aid their navigation or their defense against robots. He was giving them a gift, not just a ball, but a tacit, incredible permission to play, to be a little less invisible. Amaka found her voice. Thank you, sir. That is very kind. He gave a curt nod, his moment of softness retreating behind his formal demeanor. See that they are quiet, he said, but the old threat in the words was gone, replaced by what sounded almost like a routine. With that, he turned and walked back towards the main house, leaving behind a room buzzing with stunned excitement. Mama, did you hear? The Oga knows about the robots. Keen exclaimed, his fear completely forgotten. Amaka closed the door, leaning against it, her heart now pounding for an entirely different reason. He hadn't come to punish them. He had come to check on the mission. The reluctant astronaut had reported for duty. The tightrope was still there, but he had just thrown her a balancing pole. The game, she realized with a dawning sense of wonder, was well and truly on. The football was not in the storage room by the garage. The next evening, Amaka found it placed neatly just outside the door to the quarters. A brand new, genuine leather ball, still holding the crisp smell of the factory. It was a stark, expensive contrast to the cracked plastic toys her children were used to. It was also a silent message. He hadn't just mentioned it. He had ensured it was delivered. The act was so considerate, so deliberate, that it left Amaka feeling unsettled. Gratitude warred with a deep-seated wariness. What did he want? Men like Chief Adeyemi did not do kindness without expectation. The twins, of course, had no such reservations. They fell upon the ball with cries of joy, their earlier tension evaporating. That evening, their whispered games in the room were replaced by furtive, silent drills just outside their door. They practiced passing the ball to each other with intense concentration, their small faces screwed up in effort, determined to be worthy of the gift and not get it, or themselves, taken away. Amaka watched them from the step, her arms wrapped around herself. Every rustle of a leaf, every distant car engine, made her flinch. They were pushing the boundaries of his invisible rule, and she lived in fear of the moment they pushed too far. The moment came 2 days later. Keen, in his excitement, misjudged a kick. The ball, instead of rolling gently to Connie, took a bad bounce and shot past her, skittering across the lawn and coming to a rest squarely in the middle of the manicured grass, fully visible from the main house. All three of them froze. The ball might as well have been a bomb. It was a blatant violation. It was seen. "I'll get it," Keen whispered, already taking a step forward. "No." Amaka's command was a sharp, fearful hiss. "Stay here." Her heart hammering, she ventured out into the open. It felt like crossing a no-man's land. She could feel the dark windows of the mansion watching her. She snatched up the ball, her skin prickling with the expectation of Mrs. Cheetah's shrill voice or the chief's cold, displeased figure appearing at the patio door. Nothing happened. She scurried back to the safety of the quarters, clutching the ball to her chest. "Inside. Now, that's enough for today," she said, her voice trembling with relief and residual fear. But the ball had become a symbol of the impossible tension she lived in. It was a gift that demanded risk. It was a promise of play that came with a constant threat. The next evening, She watched the twins' faces fall as she told them the ball had to stay inside. Their whispered pleas were like little daggers. "Just 5 minutes, Mama? Well, be so careful." It was too much. The constant fear, the isolation, the guilt of stifling them. She felt the walls of the small room closing in. She needed air. She needed a moment where she wasn't holding her breath. "Stay here. Do not move," she instructed them, her voice tight. She slipped out the door, leaving it slightly ajar, and walked a few paces away, just to the edge of the large mango tree. She leaned her forehead against its rough, familiar bark, trying to steady her breathing, to quell the panic rising in her chest. She didn't hear him approach. One moment she was alone with the evening sounds of crickets. The next, a deep voice spoke from behind her. "Is there a problem, Amaka?" She whirled around. Chief Bayo stood there, still in his work clothes, his hands in his pockets. He wasn't looking at her with anger. He looked curious, almost concerned. The question, the use of her name, the sheer exhaustion and stress of the past weeks. It broke something inside her. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. A raw and honest confession she never intended to make. "It is the ball, sir," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. She gestured helplessly towards the quarters. "They love it. It is the kindest thing. But I am so afraid. Every time it leaves their feet, my heart stops. I am so terrified they will kick it too far, that it will be seen, that they will be too loud, that I will lose this job. I am so tired of being afraid." She clapped a hand over her mouth, horrified at her outburst. She had just admitted to being constantly terrified of him. She had criticized his gift. She had shown weakness. She braced for his dismissal. But Chief Bayo was silent for a long moment, looking from her anguished face to the closed door of the quarters. He seemed to be processing her fear not as an insult, but as a simple statement of fact. "The back lawn," he said finally, his voice quiet. "Behind the quarters. It is sloped down, away from the main house. The hedges are high there. The sound does not carry. They can play there for 1 hour after I return home. You will supervise them." Amaka stared at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. He wasn't punishing her. He was solving the problem. He was giving them a designated play area. He was giving them time. The relief that washed over her was so profound it left her dizzy. The lead cloak of fear she had been wearing for weeks suddenly felt lighter. "Sir, thank you." He gave a single curt nod. "See that they do not trample my hibiscus." It was his typical gruff addendum, but it lacked its usual sting. As he turned to leave, he paused. "And Amaka?" "Yes, sir? The ball is just a ball. It is not worth your fear." He walked away, leaving her standing under the mango tree, her forehead still pressed against the bark, but now for an entirely different reason. She was steadying herself not against panic, but against a wave of overwhelming, confusing gratitude. He had seen her fear, and instead of wielding it against her, he had quietly disarmed it. The first real connection had not been forged in laughter or gift-giving, but in a moment of shared understanding. He had given her children a place to play, and in doing so had given her a sliver of peace. The invisible walls around their existence had, for the first time, officially expanded. The designated play hour behind the quarters became the anchor of Amaka's day, a pocket of time that felt stolen from the grim reality of their situation. The high hedges and the sloping lawn did indeed provide a sanctuary. The twins' whispered games gave way to hushed, happy shouts and the soft thud of the football. Amaka would sit on the back step, watching them, her supervision a form of joy rather than a vigil of fear. For one precious hour each evening, they were not secrets. They were just a mother and her children at play. The change, however small, was seismic. The constant, gnawing anxiety in Amaka's gut eased just enough for other emotions to surface. Chief among them was a profound, swirling gratitude. Chief Bayo's act, his simple, practical solution to her terror, felt monumental. It was a kindness that went beyond the football. It was an acknowledgement of her struggle, a granting of grace. She felt a pressing need to thank him, But the opportunity had to be right. It couldn't be during her duties under Mrs. Cheetah's watchful eye. Couldn't be obsequious or unprofessional. It had to be something genuine. The idea came to her on Friday. Mrs. Chitty had given her a list of groceries for the weekend, a list that included ingredients for the chef to make moi. But Amaka knew something else. She remembered from a passing comment the chef had made that the chief had a particular fondness for akara, the crispy, bean-based fritters, especially when made with a specific pepper and a hint of crayfish, the way they made it in the Rivers region. It was a risk. Presenting food to your employer unsolicited could be seen as presumptuous, even insulting to the household chef. But it was also personal. It was from her home, her culture, her hands. That evening, after the twins were tucked into bed, their breathing soft and even, she went to the small, shared kitchen in the quarters. She soaked the black-eyed peas, painstakingly peeled the skins, and blended the batter with the precise amount of pepper and the precious, finely ground crayfish she had saved from her own supplies. She heated the oil in a small pot and fried the akara until they were perfectly golden brown and crispy on the outside, fluffy on the inside. The familiar, comforting aroma filled the small space, a stark contrast to the sterile, foreign smells of the main kitchen. She arranged them on a simple, clean plate, a small bowl of pepper sauce beside them. Her heart was beating fast again, but this time it was a nervous flutter, not the cold grip of fear. She waited until she saw the light go on in his study, a signal that he was working late. Taking a deep breath, she walked across the compound, the plate warm in her hands. The main house was silent. She knocked softly on the slightly ajar study door. Come. She pushed the door open. Chief Bayo was seated at his massive desk, glasses perched on his nose, frowning at a document. He looked up, his expression one of mild impatience at the interruption. "Sir," she said, her voice quieter than she intended, I wish to thank you for the lawn, for the children." She stepped forward and placed the plate on the edge of his desk, careful not to disturb any papers. "It is not much, just akara, the way we make it in my place." He looked from her face to the plate of golden fritters, then back to her face. His stern expression softened into one of genuine surprise. He was silent for a moment, and Amaka felt a hot flush of embarrassment. It was a foolish, peasant offering to a man who doubtless dined on delicacies she couldn't even name. "I did not mean to overstep, sir," she added quickly, already beginning to retreat. "I just wanted to say thank you." "Wait," he said, his voice stopping her. He put down his pen, removed his glasses, and picked up one of the akara. He examined it for a second, then took a bite. He chewed slowly, his gaze thoughtful, fixed on a point somewhere beyond the window. Amaka held her breath. He finished the first one and reached for a second, dipping it into the pepper sauce this time. After a few more bites, he nodded, almost to himself. "The chef uses too much onion. This is how my mother used to make it." The admission was so quiet, so personal, that it felt like a gift in return. He wasn't just thanking her. He was sharing a memory. She was from Wari. Amaka ventured softly, emboldened by his reaction. A faint smile touched his lips. She was. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time she didn't feel like just an employee. She felt seen. "You have her hand with the pepper." "Thank you, Amaka. This is a welcome surprise." The tension drained from her shoulders, replaced by a warm glow. "You are welcome, sir." He picked up a third akara. "The children, are they enjoying the less restricted airspace?" The question was awkward, his attempt to reference their game clumsy. But the intent was so clearly kind. Amaka couldn't help but smile. "They are, sir. Very much. Keen is convinced he will play for the Super Eagles one day." Chief Bayo actually chuckled. A low, rich sound that seemed to surprise even him. "Ambitious. I like that." The conversation could have ended there. It was already more than she had hoped for. But he surprised her again. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. She hesitated, then slowly sat on the very edge of the plush leather chair, feeling utterly out of place. He pushed the plate towards her. "Eat," I cannot finish all of these by myself. It was an order, but a gentle one. And so, in the silent, book-lined study, under the soft glow of a single lamp, the billionaire and his maid shared a plate of akara. They didn't speak much more. He asked about the twins' names, and she told him their meanings. Kenichukwu. Thank God, Kanyanachi. Let's wait for God. He nodded, a thoughtful look in his eyes. When the plate was empty, she stood to leave, taking it with her. Good night, sir. Good night, Amaka. And thank you again. As she walked back across the dark compound to the quarters, the empty plate in her hand, she felt a strange, new sensation. It wasn't just gratitude or relief. It was a connection, fragile and tentative, but real. It was built not on power or pity, but on a shared taste of home and a simple human thank you. The giant she was beginning to see had a heart that remembered, and perhaps even longed for, the simple things. The shared akara in the study had shifted something fundamental in the atmosphere of the compound. The fear that had been Amaka's constant companion didn't vanish, but it receded, replaced by a cautious, bewildering sense of normalcy. Chief Bayo's acknowledgement was no longer a threat hanging over her, but a strange, new form of security. The twins felt the change instinctively. Their hushed whispers in their designated play area gradually grew in confidence, their movements less furtive. The ball was no longer a dangerous contraband item, but a trusted companion in their adventures. A week after the akara, Amaka was sitting on the back step, mending a tear in Kanye's dress, her ears half listening to the children's game. They had moved on from interstellar missions and were now playing a vigorous, if quiet, game of tag. You can't catch me, Keen. I'm the queen of the hill, Kanye whisper shouted, scrambling to the top of the gentle slope. I'm a cheetah. Cheetahs are faster than queens, Keen countered, crawling on all fours with a ferocious, silent snarl. Amaka smiled to herself, the needle moving rhythmically through the fabric. This was peace. This was enough. She didn't hear him approach. One moment she was alone. The next, a shadow fell across her sewing. She looked up, her heart giving its now familiar, nervous leap. Chief Bayo stood there, still in his impeccably tailored suit, having come straight from his car. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the children, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Sir, Amaka said, starting to rise. Don't get up, he said, his voice quiet. He continued to watch the game. Keen, in his role as a cheetah, was so engrossed in stalking his sister that he didn't notice the new audience. He crept low to the ground, his little body coiled with concentration. Kanye, from her royal perch, saw the chief. She froze, her eyes wide, the game forgotten. She elbowed her brother, hissing a warning. Keen looked up, seeing the imposing figure of the Oga giant. He immediately abandoned his cheetah persona and scrambled to his feet, looking guilty. A tense silence fell. The joy of the moment evaporated. Amaka held her breath, waiting for the stern reminder about noise, the subtle reinforcement of the rules. Chief Bayo looked from one chastened child to the other. Then he did something astonishing. He slowly, deliberately lowered himself into a crouch. The motion was slightly awkward in his expensive suit, but it brought him closer to their level. A cheetah, you say? He asked Keen, his tone gravely serious. Keen, too terrified to speak, just nodded. I see. And what does a cheetah do when it is trying to be quiet? Keen found his voice, a tiny squeak. It crawls. Like this. He demonstrated his clumsy crawl. Chief Bayo nodded. A good technique. But your tail is too high. Keen blinked. My tail? A cheetah's tail is for balance. Yours is waving in the air like a flag. It will alert your prey. Chief Bayo said this with the absolute seriousness of a wildlife documentary narrator. And you, he said, turning to Kanye, who was still statue still. A queen of the hill does not stand still. A queen surveys her kingdom. You must be vigilant. The twins stared at him, their fear transforming into bewildered fascination. He was not scolding them. He was coaching them. Show me again, Chief Bayo said to Keen. And this time, keep your tail low. Tentatively, A grin spreading across his face, Keen dropped back to all fours. He tried to tuck his imaginary tail down, his little bottom wiggling with the effort. It was the most ridiculous, adorable sight. The sheer concentration on his face, the utter seriousness of the mighty Chief Adeyemi critiquing the form of a 5-year-old's pretend cheetah crawl. It was too much. A sound escaped Amaka. It was a half-choked gasp, a suppressed giggle that she tried desperately to smother behind her hand. But it was too late. Chief Bayo heard it. He turned his head to look at her. Amaka's eyes widened in horror at her own surly shitsuriai. Rudeness, impoliteness. She had laughed at him. But he didn't look angry. He looked surprised. And then, something even more miraculous happened. A low rumble started in his chest. It was a rough, unused sound, like an engine turning over after decades of disuse. It grew into a deep, rich, genuine chuckle. The stern lines of his face softened, crinkling around his eyes. He threw his head back slightly, and the chuckle became a full, hearty laugh. The sound was so foreign to the compound, so rich and warm, that it seemed to startle the birds in the trees. The twins, seeing the giant laugh, broke into giggles themselves, the tension completely shattered. Amaka couldn't help it. Her own nervous, horrified laugh melted into real, joyful laughter. She was laughing at the absurdity of it all, at the release of tension, at the sheer, unbelievable sight of Chief Adebayo Adeyemi, one of Nigeria's most formidable men, sitting on the grass, laughing with her children. For a full minute, the back lawn of the Adeyemi compound was filled with the sound of laughter. Deep, rumbling adult laughter, high-pitched childish giggles, and the warm, melodic sound of a woman's joy. When the laughter finally subsided, Chief Bayo wiped a tear from the corner of his eye, a look of faint wonder on his face, as if he himself couldn't believe the sound that had come out of him. He looked at Amaka, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met and held in a shared moment of pure, unguarded amusement. He stood up, brushing a few blades of grass from his trousers. "The cheetah needs work," he said to Keen, his voice still warm with humor. "But the queen's vigilance is excellent." With a final, almost shy glance at Amaka, he turned and walked back towards the main house, leaving behind a silence that was no longer tense, but buzzing with a new, incredible energy. Amaka looked at her children, their faces alight with happiness and confusion. The first laugh had been heard, and it had not brought down wrath. It had built a bridge. The sound of it echoed in the air long after he was gone, a promise of a thaw that was now undeniably, joyfully beginning. The echo of Chief Bayo's laughter seemed to linger in the compound for days, softening the edges of everything. The main house felt less like a museum and more like a place where people, however tentatively, lived. For Amaka, the constant, buzzing anxiety in her veins quieted into a watchful calm. The fear of being caught was gone, replaced by a new, curious anticipation of what small interaction the day might bring. The interactions began to follow a pattern. Chief Bayo would return from work, and after a brief period in his study, he would appear, as if by accident, on the path that led to the back lawn. He never stayed long, 10, perhaps 15 minutes. But his visits became the highlight of the twins' day, and though she would never admit it, of Amaka's as well. He was an unexpectedly patient audience for their fantastical tales. He listened with grave seriousness as Connie detailed the intricate political structure of her doll family, offering diplomatic advice on which doll should be appointed as the ambassador to the teddy bear nation. He examined the blueprints Keen drew for a rocket ship made entirely of recycled boxes, suggesting structural reinforcements for the cardboard wings. Amaka watched from her perch on the step, her mending or knitting forgotten in her lap. She saw the way he listened, not with the distracted patience of an adult humoring a child, but with a genuine, focused attention she found deeply moving. He was rediscovering a language he had long forgotten, and her children were his eager teachers. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the high hedges, casting long golden shadows across the lawn, Keen was attempting to explain the rules of a particularly complicated game involving invisible monsters and magical shields. Chief Bayo, crouching beside him, looked genuinely perplexed. "I see," he said, though it was clear he didn't. "And the shield only works if you are standing on one leg?" "Yes," Keen exclaimed, frustrated that the giant was being so slow. "Because the monsters can't see you if you're wobbly." "Ah, a tactical advantage in instability." "Advanced maneuver," Bayo replied, his lips twitching. He glanced over at Amaka, a silent plea for translation in his eyes. She couldn't suppress a smile. "It's best not to question the logic, sir. The rules change every 5 minutes." He stood up, brushing off his trousers, and walked over to her, leaving Keen to demonstrate his wobbly-legged defense to his sister. "They have quite the imaginations," he said, coming to lean against the railing next to her step. "They get it from their father," Amaka said without thinking. The words were out before she could consider their weight. The easy expression on Bayo's face shifted into one of quiet interest. He didn't look away, but his gaze became more thoughtful. He was a storyteller? The question was gentle, an invitation, not a demand. And in the warmth of the fading light, in the safety of this newfound truce, Amaka found herself wanting to answer. She wanted to speak of Chaik, to have his memory acknowledged in this new place. "He was a teacher," she said, her voice soft with memory. "Literature. He believed stories were the way we learned to be human. Our house was always full of books. He would have." Her voice caught for a moment. "He would have loved their games." Chief Bayo was silent for a moment, watching the twins, who were now both wobbling on one leg against the invisible horde. "To leave such a legacy. It is a good thing," he said finally. His voice was low, and she heard a note of something she couldn't quite identify. Not pity, but perhaps a tinge of regret. "He must have been a remarkable man." "He was," Amaka whispered, the old grief a dull, familiar ache, but softened now by time and gratitude. The conversation could have ended there, a moment of shared respect for a lost man. But then Bayo did something that surprised her. He offered a story of his own. "My father," he began, his gaze fixed on some distant point in the past, "was not a storyteller. He was a businessman, a hard man. He believed stories were a waste of time. Facts, figures, contracts, that was reality." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "The only stories he valued were the ones that ended with a profit." Amaka stayed silent, sensing he was sharing something he didn't often voice. "He would have considered this," he said, gesturing vaguely towards the playing children. "A profound waste of time." "And what do you consider it, sir?" Amaka asked softly, daringly. He looked at her then, and the setting sun caught the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "When I was perhaps Ken's age, I had an old, tattered book of Yoruba folktales. I hid it under my mattress. At night, I would read them by flashlight. Stories of the tortoise and his wisdom, of the brave hunter and the water goddess." He trailed off, the memory a faint smile on his face. "That was my rebellion, my secret world." The image of the stern, powerful billionaire as a small boy hiding a storybook was so poignant it stole Amaka's breath. He had built his entire life on his father's foundation of facts and figures, yet he had never forgotten the boy who longed for magic. "What happened to the book?" she asked. "My father found it," Bayo said, the smile vanishing. "He burned it, said it was filling my head with nonsense." The old hurt, decades old, was still there, buried deep beneath the layers of success and authority. The shared silence that followed was heavy with understanding. They were from different worlds, but in that moment, they were just two people who understood loss. One through death, the other through a denied childhood. Ken's voice cut through the evening air. "Oga, the monster is defeated. We need a new story." Bayo pushed himself off the railing. The moment of vulnerability passed, his expression shifting back to its usual composed demeanor, but it felt softer now, more approachable. "Very well," he said, walking back towards them. "Perhaps it is time for a story of the tortoise. He was the most cunning of them all." He settled himself on the grass, and the twins immediately scrambled to sit cross-legged in front of him, their faces upturned and eager. Amaka watched as he began to speak, his deep voice weaving the old, familiar tale. He was sharing his secret world with them. And as she listened, she felt a connection solidify, stronger than before. It was no longer just about her children. It was about them. A man who had lost his stories, and a woman who carried hers. They were building a new story, right here on the back lawn, and she had no idea how it would end, but for the first time, she was eager to turn the page. The fragile, beautiful routine they had built came crashing down on a Tuesday night. The peace of the compound was shattered not by a raised voice or a broken rule, but by a sound far more terrifying to a mother. The ragged, wheezing cough of a child struggling to breathe. Amaka was jerked from a deep sleep by the sound. Connie was burning up, her small body radiating a fever that seemed to have ignited out of nowhere. Her breaths were shallow, rapid whistles, and each cough was a painful, hollow bark that shook her entire frame. Keen, awakened by the noise, watched with wide, frightened eyes from his side of the bed. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Amaka. This was beyond a simple cold. This was croup or pneumonia, something serious. In Port Harcourt, she would have bundled her up and rushed to the nearby clinic. Here she was trapped. She had no car. It was the middle of the night. The nearest hospital was miles away. Her first, instinctive thought was to call Mrs. Chitty. But the house manager's first question would be, why are the children here? It would be an immediate termination. She thought of Usman, the driver, but she didn't have his number, and waking him would involve going to the main house, causing a commotion that would surely alert the chief. Tears of helplessness streamed down her face as she held Connie, rocking her, trying to soothe the desperate coughs. She felt her daughter's tiny heart hammering against her own chest. The fear was paralyzing. Her job, their safety, their entire future. It was all balanced against the life of her child. "Mama, Connie is sick," Keen whispered, his voice trembling. "I know, my love. I know." Amaka choked out, her mind racing down a dark tunnel with no exit. It was Ken's small, scared voice that finally broke her paralysis. She could not let her fear cost her daughter her health, or worse. She had to face the consequences. She would beg, she would plead, but she had to get help. Gently laying Connie back on the bed, she pulled on a wrapper over her nightdress. "Stay with her, Keen. I will be right back." She ran out of the quarters, not caring about the noise, her bare feet slapping against the cold gravel path. The main house loomed ahead, dark and silent. She didn't go to the staff entrance. She went straight to the grand front door and hammered on it with her fist, the sound shockingly loud in the sleeping compound. A light came on upstairs. Moments later, the porch light flickered on, and the door was wrenched open by a bleary-eyed, robe-clad Chief Bayo. Mrs. Chitty appeared behind him, her face a mask of outrage at the disturbance. "What is the meaning of this?" Mrs. Chitty began, but Chief Bayo cut her off with a sharp gesture. His eyes were on Amaka's tear-streaked, terrified face. "It's Connie, sir," Amaka gasped, her words tumbling over each other. "She can't breathe. The fever, the cough. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to disturb you. But please, please, you have to help her." Any trace of sleep vanished from Chief Bayo's face. He didn't ask why the child was there. He didn't scold or question. He saw only a mother's raw terror. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice crisp and commanding. "In the quarters," Amaka sobbed, pointing. He was already moving, striding past her, his robe flowing behind him. "Chitty, call Dr. Adekunle. Tell him it's an emergency, a child with respiratory distress. Tell him to meet us at the hospital. Now." Mrs. Chitty, for once speechless, scurried back inside to make the call. Amaka ran after him, leading the way back to the small room. Chief Bayo had to duck to get through the doorway. He took in the scene in one swift glance. The tiny, struggling child on the bed, the terrified brother huddled nearby, the palpable fear in the cramped space. He didn't hesitate. He strode to the bed and scooped Connie up into his arms. She was so small against his broad chest, her feverish head lolling against his shoulder. Her coughing seemed to ease for a moment, startled by the new presence. Get a blanket to wrap her in, he instructed Amaka, his voice calm and steady, a rock in her storm of panic. Bring the boy. We're leaving. Usman, alerted by Mrs. Chitty, had the Range Rover running at the front door within minutes. Chief Bayo climbed into the back seat, still holding Connie, while Amaka scrambled in after him with Keen clinging to her. The drive to the private hospital was a blur of streetlights and silent prayers. Bayo held Connie securely, occasionally feeling her forehead, his expression grim. Amaka could only watch, her hand clamped over her mouth, every ragged breath from her daughter feeling like a knife in her own heart. He didn't speak words of empty comfort. He simply took charge. Upon arrival, a medical team was waiting, thanks to his call. He handed Connie over to them with a quiet, "Her name is Kanyanachi. Do everything necessary." Amaka made to follow the gurney, but a doctor stopped her. "We need to take her to pediatrics for assessment and treatment. You can see her soon." She stood in the sterile, bright hallway, feeling lost and helpless, until a large, warm hand settled on her shoulder. She looked up into Chief Bayo's face. "Dr. Adekunle is the best," he said, his voice low. "She is in good hands." He then looked down at Keen, who was hiding behind Amaka's legs, overwhelmed and crying silently. Bayo crouched down, bringing himself to the little boy's level. "Your sister is very brave," he said, his voice softer than Amaka had ever heard it. "The doctors are going to help her. You must be brave for her too." He led them to a private waiting room. He didn't leave. He sat with them, his presence a silent, immovable fortress against the fear. He called Mrs. Chitty to update the household, his voice calm and authoritative. An hour later, the doctor came out. "She has a severe case of croup," he said. "We've given her steroids and adrenaline to reduce the swelling in her airways. Her oxygen levels are improving. She will be fine." The relief that washed over Amaka was so powerful her knees buckled. Chief Bayo's hand shot out, steadying her elbow, holding her up. "Can I see her?" Amaka whispered. "She's sleeping, but you can sit with her." Amaka looked at Chief Bayo, at the man who had not hesitated, who had not judged, who had used his power without a second thought to save her child. The words "thank you" felt pitifully inadequate. "Go," he said, gently nudging her towards the room. "We will be here." As she walked into the room to sit by her sleeping daughter's bedside, she knew something fundamental had changed. The crisis had laid bare the truth. He was no longer just her employer. In the dark of the night, when it mattered most, he had proven himself to be their protector. And that changed everything. The private room was a soft-edged world of hushed beeps and dim light. Connie lay sleeping, an oxygen cannula tucked under her nose, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that was no longer a desperate struggle. The terrifying, ragged whistle was gone, replaced by the gentle hum of medical equipment and her own peaceful breaths. Amaka sat in a chair pulled close to the bed, one hand resting on her daughter's small arm, as if to reassure herself that she was real, she was safe. The adrenaline that had carried her through the panic had ebbed, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. And in the quiet aftermath, other emotions began to surface, swirling in the space left by the receding fear. Gratitude so immense it felt like a physical weight on her chest. Shame, for having to be rescued, for her powerlessness. And a confusing, overwhelming tenderness towards the man who had, without a moment's hesitation, shouldered her burden as his own. She heard the door open softly behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. His presence seemed to change the air in the room, to make it stiller, more charged. "The doctor says she will sleep through the night." Chief Bayo's low voice rumbled from the doorway. "The worst is over." Amaka nodded, unable to find her voice. She kept her eyes fixed on Connie, afraid that if she looked at him, the fragile dam holding back her emotions would completely break. She heard him move further into the room. He came to stand on the other side of the bed, looking down at the sleeping child. In the dim light, his features, usually so stern and imposing, seemed softer, etched with a concern that made Amaka's heart ache. "She looks so small," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "That did it." A A sob escaped Amaka's lips, a raw, broken sound she tried to stifle with her hand. The tears she had held back through the terror and the relief now came in a silent, relentless stream, tracking down her face and dripping onto the starched white sheets. She felt rather than saw him move. He rounded the foot of the bed and stood beside her chair. He didn't touch her. He simply stood there, a solid, silent pillar in the quiet room, allowing her to fall apart. "I was so scared," she finally choked out, the words muffled by her hands. "I didn't know what to do. I thought I was going to lose her. And I thought of calling you, and I was so afraid you'd be angry, that you'd—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "That you'd fire me, that you'd turn us away. Look at me, Amaka." His voice was gentle, but it held a command she couldn't disobey. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her vision was blurred with tears, but she could see the intensity in his eyes. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said, his gaze holding hers. "Nothing. A child was sick. You did the only thing a mother could do. You came for help." The simple absolution in his words undid her completely. The last of her composure shattered. Her shoulders slumped, and a wave of helpless exhaustion washed over her. She was so tired of being strong, of carrying it all alone. He seemed to understand. He pulled the other visitor's chair closer and sat down beside her, his large frame making the chair seem small. They sat in silence for a long moment, side by side, watching over the sleeping child. "I remember that fear," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at his own hands, clasped between his knees. "Not as a parent. I never had that. But as a child. I had malaria once, very bad. My father was away on business. My mother, she was a fragile woman. She was terrified. I remember the feeling of her fear more than I remember the fever. It's a lonely feeling for a child. To see the adult who is supposed to protect you be as scared as you are." He was sharing another piece of himself, another fragment of the lonely boy he had been. He was telling her that he understood her terror not from a place of paternal experience, but from a place of shared vulnerability. "You weren't scared," Amaka whispered, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "You were magnificent." He gave a small, self-deprecating shake of his head. "I was practical. I had the resources and I used them. There is no magnificence in that." He finally turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "The strength was yours. The love that forced you to knock on that door knowing the risk. That is strength." His words wrapped around her, a balm to her raw nerves. He saw her. He truly saw her. Not just the maid who broke the rules, but the mother who would break every rule to save her child. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. The dark, quiet room, the sleeping child between them, the shared confession of fear. The walls that usually stood between them, of employer and employee, of billionaire and maid, of man and woman, had dissolved in the face of the crisis. What was left was something profoundly human and profoundly disarming. Amaka felt a pull towards him, a magnetic force she didn't understand and couldn't resist. She saw the same confusion, the same dawning awareness, reflected in his eyes. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fleeting second, and the air between them grew thick and warm. He reached out then, slowly, as if giving her every opportunity to pull away. His thumb, surprisingly gentle, brushed away a stray tear that lingered on her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of sensation that shot through her entire body. It was not the touch of an employer. It was the touch of a man. Her breath hitched. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between his ingrained reserve and whatever this new, powerful feeling was. The moment stretched, fragile and suspended. The world had narrowed to this room, to this space between them. Then, from the bed, Connie stirred in her sleep, letting out a soft sigh. The spell broke. Chief Bayo withdrew his hand, the moment of vulnerability shuddering behind his eyes. He cleared his throat and stood up, the commanding presence returning, though it seemed less solid than before. "You should try to rest," he said, his voice back to its usual, slightly gruff tone, though it lacked its former edge. "I will have Usman take you home in the morning. I will stay with Keen." "You don't have to," Amaka began. "I will stay," he repeated, leaving no room for argument. It was not a request. It was a decision. He was still the chief, but his care now felt like a privilege, not a command. He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. He didn't look back when he spoke. "She will be fine, Amaka. Sleep." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the ghost of his touch on her skin and the echoing silence of his confession. The crisis was over, but in its wake, it had revealed a new, terrifying, and exhilarating landscape. The vulnerability they had shared had built a bridge, and now they were both standing on it, unsure of whether to cross or to retreat. But the line between them had been irrevocably blurred. Kanye's recovery was swift, thanks to the excellent care. Within 2 days, she was back in the quarters, her energy returning, though Amaka insisted on a few days of quiet rest. The atmosphere in the compound, however, could not return to what it was. The crisis had acted like a lightning strike, forever altering the emotional terrain. Chief Bayo's manner towards Amaka was different. The formality remained, but it was now layered with a new, unspoken understanding. His inquiries about the children's health each evening were not polite small talk. They were genuine. He had seen her at her most raw, and he had not looked away. Instead, he had stepped into the fray. A week after the hospital stay, on a bright Saturday morning, Amaka was in the main kitchen helping to organize the pantry when Chief Bayo found her. Mrs. Chitty was out for the day, and the house was quiet. "Amaka," she turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, sir?" He stood in the doorway, dressed not in a suit, but in casual slacks and a simple polo shirt. The change was disarming, making him seem younger, more approachable. "The children," he began, his tone businesslike, though she detected a hint of awkwardness beneath it. "Are they fully recovered?" "Yes, sir. Connie is back to her old self. Driving her brother mad," Amaka said with a small smile. "Good." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "It is a nice day, too nice to be spent hiding behind hedges." Amaka's smile faded, replaced by confusion. "Sir, I have to make a trip to the private zoo on the island. The one I sponsor. It will be quiet today. I thought, perhaps the children would enjoy it." He delivered this in the same tone he might use to announce a board meeting, but he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Amaka stared at him, certain she had misheard. "An outing? To a zoo? With him? Sir, that is too much. We couldn't possibly impose." She stammered, her mind reeling. "It is not an imposition. It is a change of scenery. For their health," he added, as if needing a practical justification. "The fresh air will be beneficial. Usman will drive us. We will leave in 1 hour." It was not a question. It was a decree. But it was the kindest, most bewildering decree she had ever received. An hour later, Amaka emerged from the quarters with the twins, who were vibrating with a mixture of excitement and terror. She had dressed them in their best clothes, a little button-down shirt and shorts for Keen, a bright yellow dress for Connie. She herself wore a simple but pretty floral print dress, feeling strangely self-conscious. The black Range Rover was idling by the main entrance. Usman stood by the open rear door, a rare smile on his usually stoic face. Chief Bayo was already inside. He watched as Usman helped the children into the spacious back seat, then offered a hand to Amaka. She slid in, her heart pounding, feeling like she was in a dream. The drive was initially silent. The twins pressed against Amaka's sides, staring in awe at the Oga giant who was now sharing their car. Bayo seemed content to look out the window, but Amaka saw the slight smile on his face as Connie whispered, "The car has a television." Head had a screen lowered for them, and soon a cartoon was playing, breaking the ice. By the time they arrived at the zoo, the twins' fear had been replaced by buzzing anticipation. The zoo was, as promised, virtually empty. A manager met them at the gate and personally escorted them through the pristine, leafy pathways. For the twins, it was a wonderland. They darted from enclosure to enclosure, their whispers of awe becoming full-blown exclamations of joy as their inhibitions melted away. "Oga, look, a giraffe. Its neck is so long," Keen shouted, pointing. Chief Bayo walked beside Amaka, his hands behind his back, observing not just the animals, but the children's reactions. "Indeed," he said, a note of amusement in his voice. "It appears to be." He surprised her by knowing facts about the animals, delivering them in his deep, serious voice that made even the silliest monkey seem like a subject of great importance. He explained how a zebra's stripes were like a fingerprint, unique to each individual. He told them the cheetah was the fastest land animal, and Keen puffed out his chest, remembering his own cheetah game. Amaka watched it all unfold, her heart feeling too full for her chest. She watched him kneel down so Connie could see the meerkats better. She watched him lift Keen onto his shoulders to get a better view of the sleeping lion. The sight of her son perched atop the mighty Chief Adeyemi, his small hands holding onto the man's head for balance, was one she knew she would never forget. This was no longer just tolerance. This was participation. This was investment. During a break for ice cream, another first for the twins, they sat at a small table. Connie, emboldened by sugar and happiness, looked at Chief Bayo and asked, "Do you like the zoo, Oga?" He looked at her, a drip of chocolate ice cream on her chin, and his expression softened in a way that made Amaka's breath catch. "I do today," he said quietly. "I do today." On the drive home, the twins, exhausted and happy, fell asleep, Ken's head on Amaka's lap, Kanye's on Bayo's. He didn't move her, letting the small, trusting weight rest against him. The car pulled into the compound. Usman helped her gather the sleeping children. As she turned to carry Keen towards the quarters, Chief Bayo stopped her. "Amaka!" She turned back. He was standing by the car door, the setting sun casting him in a golden light. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but the look in his eyes was complex, filled with an emotion she was almost afraid to name. It was a very pleasant afternoon. "Thank you, sir," she whispered back. They will never forget it." "Nor will I," he said, and the honesty in his voice sent a shiver through her. As she tucked the twins into bed that night, their faces still flushed with joy, she replayed the day. The feel of the sun, the sound of the children's laughter, the way he had looked at her. It wasn't just an outing, it was a declaration. He was no longer just allowing them into his world. He was actively inviting them. And with every passing moment, Amaka felt herself not just willing, but eager to accept. The zoo outing lingered in the air of the Adeyemi compound like a sweet, disorienting perfume. For the twins, it was a source of endless, excited reminiscing. For Amaka, it was the beginning of a quiet, internal earthquake. She found herself replaying the day in minute detail. The weight of Keen on Chief Bayo's shoulders, the quiet confession in the car. "Nor will I," the way the sunlight had caught the gray at his temples. A dangerous warmth bloomed in her chest each time, a feeling she fiercely tried to stamp out. It was impossible. He was her employer. He was Chief Adebayo Adeyemi, a man whose name was synonymous with power and wealth, a man who moved in circles she could scarcely imagine. She was Amaka Nwachukwu, a widow, a maid, a woman living on his charity. The gap between them wasn't just wide. It was a chasm, deep and societal. Yet, every evening when he appeared on the back lawn, the chasm seemed to shrink. He wasn't the billionaire then. He was just Bayo, the man who listened to fantastical stories, who remembered the rules of complicated games, whose laughter was becoming a more frequent, cherished sound. The conflict churned within her, a storm of longing and self-reproach. She would catch herself noticing the way his agbada fit the broad set of his shoulders, or the surprising gentleness of his hands when he fixed a toy. She would then immediately chastise herself. "Foolish woman," she'd think. "He is being kind to the children. Nothing more. Do not mistake his charity for something it is not." She began to withdraw just slightly. When he came to the lawn, she would find a reason to go inside, to fetch water, to check on something. She kept their conversations focused solely on the twins, deflecting any personal questions he tentatively offered. He noticed. Of course he noticed. She saw the faint flicker of confusion in his eyes when she cut a conversation short, the slight tightening of his jaw when she found an excuse to leave. His visits became shorter, his demeanor more reserved, as if he were retreating behind his walls in response to hers. The tension was a live wire between them, humming with everything left unsaid. One afternoon, Mrs. Chitty was away on an errand, and Amaka was alone in the main house, dusting the living room. She was lost in thought, worrying over the impossible situation, when a voice spoke from the doorway. "You have been avoiding me." She jumped, nearly dropping the precious Ming vase in her hands. Chief Bayo stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, leaning against the doorframe. He was still in his work clothes, having returned early. I don't know what you mean, sir," she stammered, placing the vase carefully back on its shelf and focusing intently on her dusting. "I have my duties. Your duties do not require you to flee every time I step onto my own lawn," he said, his voice calm but direct. He pushed off the doorframe and walked into the room. "Have I done something to offend you?" The question was so earnest, so far from the angry accusation she had feared, that it threw her. She stopped her frantic dusting and finally looked at him. The confusion and something that looked like genuine concern on his face undid her. "No, sir, not at all. You have been more than kind." The words tumbled out. "It is me. I am confused." He was silent for a moment, watching her. "Confused by what?" She gestured helplessly around the opulent room, then back at herself, in her simple maid's uniform. "By all of this, sir. The zoo, the football, the way you are with them. I don't know how to. I don't know what is expected of me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I am afraid of misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding what?" he pressed, taking a step closer. The air between them crackled. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm. She couldn't say it. She couldn't give voice to the terrifying, hopeful thought. He seemed to understand the war inside her. His expression softened. "Amaka," he said, and her name on his lips was a caress. "I am also confused." The admission shocked her into silence. He looked away, running a hand over his face, a gesture of rare vulnerability. "For 30 years, my life has been a predictable equation. Work, success, solitude. It was the equation I understood. Then you arrived. With your—" he seemed to search for the word. "Your noise, your laughter, your fierce, stubborn love for those children. You have disrupted the equation." He took another step closer. They were now only a few feet apart. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne. "I find myself thinking about things I haven't thought of in decades. Stories, games, the sound of laughter in the hallways." His gaze was intense, willing her to understand. "I look forward to coming home. Do you understand how strange that is for me?" Amaka could only stare at him, her breath caught in her throat. He was laying his own confusion bare, meeting hers with his. "I don't know what this is," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "I don't have a blueprint for it, but I know that the thought of you being afraid of me, of you withdrawing from me, I find that I do not like it at all." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken admission. He wasn't declaring love. He was stating a simple, profound truth. She and her children had become important to him. Her presence mattered. "I am not afraid of you, sir," she whispered, finding her voice at last. "I am afraid of my own feelings. This is not proper." A faint, wry smile touched his lips. "I have spent my entire life doing what is proper. It is a surprisingly lonely way to live." He held her gaze for a long moment, and in his eyes, she saw the same war she felt inside. Desire warring with duty, hope warring with fear. "Do not withdraw, Amaka," he said softly, a plea wrapped in a command. "The children would miss you, and I—" He hesitated, then finished, "I would notice your absence." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving her standing amidst the priceless art and silent furniture. her world tilted irrevocably on its axis. The conflict was still there, but it was now a shared conflict. They were both standing on the edge of the same precipice, both terrified, both captivated, looking down into the unknown together. The chasm was still there, but he had just offered her his hand, and she was no longer sure she had the strength to refuse it. The truth, once spoken, could not be unspoken. Chief Bayo's confession, "I am also confused," hung in the air between them, a tangible thing. It should have been a relief, a validation of the strange electricity she felt. Instead, it plunged Amaka into a deeper, more private turmoil. His words played on a loop in her mind. "I find myself thinking about things. I look forward to coming home." They were the most beautiful and terrifying words she had ever heard. In the quiet solitude of her room, after the twins were asleep, she would allow herself to dream. She would imagine a life where his smiles were for her alone, where his deep laugh was a sound she could bask in every day, where she wasn't a secret kept in the shadows but a woman standing proudly by his side. The fantasy was so potent it made her chest ache. But daylight and reality were brutal correctives. She was scrubbing a bathroom floor on her hands and knees when Mrs. Chitty came in, her lips pursed. "The chief has asked for a special dinner on Friday," she said, her tone implying a great inconvenience. "He is entertaining the Alakija family. Ensure the silver is polished to a mirror finish. There can be no mistakes. The Alakijas, a name synonymous with immense wealth and social stature." The reminder was a bucket of cold water. This was his world, a world of polished silver, multimillion naira deals, and dinners with other titans of industry. Where did a maid with 2 children fit into that picture? The doubt was a poison ivy, spreading under her skin. Was she a fascinating diversion for a lonely man? A temporary break from the solitude he had grown tired of? He spoke of disruption, but what happened when the novelty wore off? When he grew tired of the noise and longed for the predictable equation of his old life? She thought of Chaik. Their love had been simple, equal, built on shared dreams and a shared background. There had been no power imbalance, no societal gulf to cross. What she felt for Chief Bayo was a tempestuous sea of uncertainty, and she was afraid of drowning in it. Her fears were compounded by the sheer practicality of it all. If she allowed these feelings to grow, and it all went wrong, she wouldn't just lose a job. She would lose the stability he had given her children. She would lose the roof over their heads. She would be risking their future on a feeling, and that was a gamble her maternal heart could not bear. She watched him with the twins, her heart swelling with love and tightening with fear in equal measure. He was so good with them. He brought out a confidence in Keen, a cleverness in Connie, that she adored. But was he playing a part? Was this just the charm of a wealthy man indulging in a temporary fantasy of fatherhood? One evening, he brought them an expensive, intricate model airplane kit. He and Keen spent an hour at the small table in the quarters, their heads bent together, carefully following the instructions. Amaka watched from the bed where she was reading to Connie, and the domesticity of the scene was so perfect it felt like a knife twisting in her gut. "This isn't real," the doubt whispered. "He will pack up and return to his mansion, and you will be left here, your heart broken, your children confused." Later, after he had left and the children were asleep, she found a small, forgotten screwdriver from the model kit on the floor. She picked it up, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of the moment that had just passed. Felt like a metaphor, a small, necessary, but ultimately cold and functional piece of a beautiful illusion. She began to build her walls higher. When he sought her out for conversation, she made herself busy. When his gaze held hers for a moment too long, she looked away. She poured all her energy into her work, into the twins, into being the perfect, invisible employee he had originally hired. She saw the frustration in his eyes. He had offered her a glimpse of his vulnerability, and she was responding by retreating into a shell of propriety. It wasn't fair to him, but her fear was a more powerful master than her desire. One night she dreamed of Chaik. He wasn't angry or sad, just looking at her with his kind, understanding eyes. He didn't speak, but the message was clear. Be careful. Your heart is not just your own anymore. She woke up with tears on her pillow, torn between the ghost of a love that had been safe and the terrifying, dazzling possibility of a new one. She was standing at a crossroads, one path leading to a predictable, safe loneliness, the other to a potential paradise that could very well be a mirage. The weight of the choice was hers alone to bear, and it felt heavier than any burden she had ever carried. Her doubts were not just about him. They were about her own worth, her own courage, and whether she dared to believe that a man like him could truly see a woman like her. A week had passed since Amaka had begun her retreat, a week of strained smiles and conversations that died before they could truly begin. The easy camaraderie that had flourished on the back lawn was gone, replaced by a polite, painful distance. Chief Bayo's confusion had hardened into a quiet frustration, and the compound, once filled with a tentative new energy, felt stifling again. The tension came to a head on a balmy Friday evening. The dinner with the Alakija family had been a success, a masterclass in opulence and social grace. Amaka had helped serve, moving like a ghost through the dining room, invisible in her crisp uniform. She had watched Chief Bayo in his element, charming, powerful, utterly at ease in his world of wealth and influence. It had only reinforced her doubts. He belonged to that world. She did not. After the guests had left and the last of the cleaning was done, Amaka needed air. The formality of the evening, the constant reminder of her place, had left her feeling suffocated. She slipped out through the patio doors and walked into the moonlit garden, the cool night air a relief on her skin. The garden was transformed at night, the familiar shapes of hibiscus and bougainvillea becoming mysterious silhouettes. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of the generator. She walked towards the mango tree, its broad leaves silvered by the moonlight, seeking the solace of its familiar shadow. She didn't hear him approach. One moment she was alone, the next, she sensed a presence. She turned, and her heart leapt into her throat. Chief Bayo stood a few feet away, having shed his formal agbada for a simple, dark linen shirt. He had been looking for her. "You vanished," he said, his voice low, blending with the night sounds. "I needed some air," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. "It was a successful evening, sir." He ignored the pleasantry, taking a step closer. The moonlight carved out the strong planes of his face, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Why are you doing this, Amaka?" "Doing what, sir?" "This," he said, gesturing vaguely between them. "This retreat, this silence. You look at me as if I am a problem to be managed, not a man you." He trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging, heavy with implication. Her defenses rose. "I am your employee, sir. I am remembering my place, as I should." The words sounded hollow and brittle even to her own ears. A flash of something like anger crossed his features. "Do not hide behind that," he said, his voice gaining an edge. "We moved past that weeks ago. You know we did." He took another step, closing the distance between them. She could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne, mixed with the night-blooming jasmine. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. "I told you I was confused," he continued, his gaze intense, pinning her in place. "I have been alone for a very long time, Amaka. I had made peace with it. Then you and your children crashed into my life and showed me what I was missing. You showed me what a home could sound like, what it could feel like." His honesty was disarming, stripping away her defenses layer by layer. She wanted to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. "I don't know what this is either," he admitted, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "But I know that I do not want to go back to the silence. And I know that the way you look at me lately feels like a door closing. A door I only just discovered was open." Tears welled in Amaka's eyes, glistening in the moonlight. "I am afraid," she confessed, the admission torn from her. "This, whatever this is, cannot be your world, my world. I have my children to think of. I cannot risk their security on a feeling." The word, feeling, hung between them, fragile and immense. "Is it just a feeling?" he asked, his voice so low it was almost a rumble. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He lifted a hand, and slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he cupped her cheek. His thumb stroked away a tear that had escaped, his touch achingly gentle. The contact was an electric shock. Every doubt, every fear, was incinerated in the heat of that single touch. Her breath hitched, and she swayed towards him, her resolve crumbling. His eyes searched hers, asking a silent question. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the sound of their shared, ragged breathing. The moonlight, the jasmine, the distant crickets. It all faded into a blur. He leaned in slowly, his intention clear. His gaze dropped to her lips. This was it, the precipice, the point of no return. Amaka's eyes fluttered closed. Her heart was no longer hammering in fear, but pounding with a wild, terrifying hope. She could feel his breath on her skin, warm and sweet. And then, the sharp, shrill ring of a phone shattered the silence. The spell shattered like glass. Chief Bayo jerked back as if burned, his hand dropping from her face. The moment was gone. He reached into his pocket, his movements stiff, and pulled out his phone. The screen illuminated his face, which was now a mask of frustrated annoyance. Adebayo, he barked into the phone, his voice back to its businesslike tone, though she could hear the strain in it. He listened for a moment, then turned slightly away from her, his free hand running through his hair in a gesture of pure exasperation. Now? Can it not wait until morning? Very well. I am coming. He ended the call and shoved the phone back into his pocket. He turned to look at her, but the moment was lost. The intimacy had been severed by the demands of his other life. I have to go. Situation at the office, he said, his voice formal, distant. The man who had almost kissed her was gone, replaced once more by the chief. Amaka could only nod, her body trembling with adrenaline and a crushing sense of anticlimax. Of course, sir. He hesitated for a second, as if he wanted to say something more, to reclaim the moment. But the phone call had done its work, dragging him back to reality. Without another word, he turned and strode back towards the house, his figure quickly swallowed by the shadows. Amaka remained under the mango tree, alone, her cheeks still burning from his touch. The almost kiss hung in the air, a ghost of what might have been. It wasn't a rejection. It was an interruption, but it felt like a verdict, a stark reminder that his world would always have the power to intrude, to pull him away, to shatter their fragile, stolen moments. The door was still ajar, but now she knew what lay on the other side was both more beautiful and more painful than she had ever imagined. The days after the almost kiss were an exquisite form of torture. The air in the compound was thick with everything that had been left unsaid, every unspent emotion from that moonlit encounter. Amaka moved through her duties like an automaton, her mind replaying the feel of his hand on her cheek, the heat of his breath, the devastating interruption. Chief Bayo, for his part, was a storm contained within a suit. He was brusque, preoccupied, and spent long hours locked in his study or away from the house. He didn't come to the back lawn. The easy rhythm of their evenings was broken. It felt like a punishment, a withdrawal so complete it confirmed Amaka's worst fears. She had overstepped, and he was re-establishing the boundaries she had foolishly believed were dissolving. The doubt returned, colder and more certain than before. She had been right to be afraid. The fantasy was over. The reality was this, a return to silence, to distance, to being just the maid. On the third day, Mrs. Chitty informed her that the chief would be away for the night on business. The news felt like a final nail in the coffin. He was leaving, putting physical distance between them to match the emotional chasm that had reopened. That evening, the quarters felt smaller and lonelier than ever. The twins, sensing her melancholy, were quiet and clingy. She put them to bed early, her heart a lead weight in her chest. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, watching them sleep, the walls of her life feeling as though they were closing in on her. She had dared to hope, and now the crash back to reality was devastating. She didn't know how long she sat there in the dark, lost in her thoughts. The sound of a car engine outside didn't register at first. Then, the crunch of gravel, not on the main driveway, but on the path that led directly to the quarters. Her breath caught. Usman, Mrs. Chitty? But it was late. Too late for either of them. A firm, familiar knock sounded on the door. Her heart leapt into her throat. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and went to the door. She opened it a crack. Chief Bayo stood there. He wasn't in a suit. He looked rumpled, tired, still in the clothes he'd worn that morning. But his eyes burned with an intensity she had never seen before. He hadn't gone away on business. He had come back. "Sir? I thought you were—" "I couldn't stay away," he interrupted, his voice rough, raw. He didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed the door open just enough to step inside, forcing her to take a step back. The small room seemed to shrink with his presence. He closed the door behind him, plunging them into near darkness, save for the sliver of moonlight from the window. He looked past her to the sleeping children, ensuring they were undisturbed. Then his gaze returned to her, searing in its intensity. "These last few days have been unbearable," he said, the words pouring out of him in a low, urgent torrent. "I have tried to focus on work. I have tried to be rational, to be the man I have always been. But I cannot." Amaka could only stare at him, her heart pounding, afraid to breathe, afraid to break whatever spell had brought him here. "That night in the garden," he continued, taking a step closer. "That was not a mistake. That interruption was the mistake. It stole what I have wanted for weeks." He reached out, but this time he didn't cup her cheek. He took both of her hands in his. His grip was firm, warm, anchoring her in the storm of his emotion. "I have spent my life building empires, Amaka. I have acquired land, companies, wealth. I thought that was purpose. I thought that was enough." He shook his head, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "But it is empty. This house. It was a museum to my success, and it was the loneliest place on earth." He looked over at the sleeping twins, his expression softening with a wonder that made Amaka's throat tight. "Then you came. You with your defiance and your courage and your beautiful, brilliant children. You brought noise into my silence. You brought chaos into my order. And you brought light into my darkness." Tears began to stream down Amaka's face, silent and unchecked. "I don't care about propriety," he said, his voice dropping to a fervent whisper. "I don't care about the gossip or the differences in our worlds. Those are man-made prisons, and I have been the chief warden of my own for too long." He took a deep breath, his gaze locking with hers, pouring every ounce of his conviction into his next words. "I love you, Amaka Nwachukwu. I love your strength. I love your heart. I love the mother you are. And I love those children as if they were my own flesh and blood." The declaration was so direct, so powerful. It stole the air from her lungs. This was no confused admission. This was a man who had fought his demons and arrived at a truth he would no longer deny. "This is not a passing fascination," he insisted, seeing the lingering doubt in her eyes. "This is the most real thing I have ever felt. You have not just disrupted my equation, Amaka. You have solved it. You and Keen and Connie. You are the answer." He brought her hands to his lips and kissed them, a gesture of such reverence it broke her completely. "This house," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is too big for one man, and it has been too quiet for too long. It is not a home. It is a shell. But it could be, with you in it. Not as a maid, not as a secret, but as my wife, as their father, as my family." He wasn't asking her to be his mistress. He wasn't offering her a comfortable arrangement. He was offering her everything. His name, his protection, his heart. He was offering to make a family with her. The last of Amaka's walls crumbled to dust. The doubts were silenced, not by his wealth, but by the sheer, undeniable truth in his eyes. This was no mirage. This was a man, proud and powerful, on his knees before her in every way that mattered, offering her his world. She didn't hesitate. She pulled her hands from his and instead framed his face, feeling the faint stubble on his jaw, the proof of his long, tormented day. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy and relief. Yes, the word was a key turning in a lock. A brilliant, radiant smile broke across his face, transforming his tired features, making him look years younger. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest, as if he would never let go. She could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart against hers, a new rhythm for their new life, finally in sync. Outside, the world continued on, unaware. But inside the small, humble quarters, a billionaire's fortress of solitude was finally, completely, and forever breached by love. The morning after Chief Bayo's declaration, the world looked different. The sunlight streaming into the small quarters seemed brighter, the air sweeter. Amaka woke with a feeling of weightless joy, the memory of his arms around her, his words in her ear, feeling more real than any dream. But as the day began, a new, different anxiety took hold. His love was a private sanctuary, but now it had to face the world. And the world, she knew, could be cruel. Chief Bayo, however, was a man of decisive action. He had made his choice, and he would not hide it. His first act was to summon Mrs. Chitty to his study. Amaka, dusting the hallway, heard the low murmur of his voice, firm and unequivocal, followed by a stunned silence, and then a much quieter, subdued "Yes, sir," from the house manager. When Mrs. Chitty emerged, her face was a carefully neutral mask, but her eyes, when they briefly met Amaka's, held a new, wary respect. The balance of power in the household had permanently shifted. The next test came sooner than expected. The annual Adeyemi Foundation Charity Gala, one of the most exclusive events on Lagos' social calendar, was just a week away. It was always held at the mansion, a glittering spectacle of wealth and influence. "You will accompany me," Bayo told Amaka that evening, as they sat watching the twins play on their now-sanctioned patch of lawn. It was not a question. Amaka's stomach lurched. "Bayo, no, I can't. Everyone will be there. They'll stare. They'll talk." The thought of facing the Alaki Jas, the Dangotes, all the society pages and their sharp-eyed columnists, made her feel faint. He took her hand, his grip reassuring. "Let them talk. Let them stare. They will be staring at the most beautiful woman in the room. And they will be talking about the woman who finally captured the heart of the elusive Chief Adeyemi." He said it with such absolute conviction that some of her fear eased. "It is time the world met the woman I love, on my arm, as my equal." The days that followed were a whirlwind. A personal stylist arrived at the quarters, her mouth a perfect O of surprise at her assignment, followed by a parade of outfits. A makeup artist came for a trial run. Bayo insisted on everything being perfect, not for the sake of show, but because he wanted her to feel as magnificent as he believed her to be. The night of the gala, Amaka stood in front of the full-length mirror in her room. The woman staring back was a stranger. She wore a stunning gown of deep navy blue oak, intricately embroidered with silver thread, modern and elegant. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, and subtle makeup highlighted her features. She looked beautiful, but she felt like an imposter. A soft knock came at the door. It was Bayo. He stood there, resplendent in a matching navy agbada embroidered with the same silver thread. His eyes widened when he saw her, and for a moment he was speechless. "Amaka," he breathed, stepping into the room. "You are breathtaking." He took her hands, his gaze full of awe and pride. "Are you ready?" "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice shaking. "So am I," he confessed with a small smile. "But we will be terrified together." He led her out, not through the back, but through the main house. The staff, lined up to assist with the event, stopped and stared. Usman gave her a small, proud nod. Mrs. Chitty, to her credit, offered a stiff but genuine, "You look lovely, madam." The grand ballroom was a vision of light and flowers, filled with the most powerful and glamorous people in Nigeria. A hush fell as they entered. Hundreds of eyes turned towards them. Amaka felt the weight of their gazes, the surprise, the curiosity, the instant judgment. She held on to Bayo's arm tighter, her knees weak. He covered her hand with his, anchoring her. He did not flinch or hurry. He walked slowly, confidently, nodding to acquaintances, but his primary focus was on her. Atta Bayo. Wonderful event as always. A portly man boomed, his eyes flicking with open curiosity to Amaka. Thank you, Tund, Bayo said smoothly. Allow me to introduce Amaka Nwachukwu. He did not use a title. He did not offer an explanation. He simply stated her name, with a weight and respect that made it clear she was his guest of honor. They moved through the room, Bayo introducing her to everyone. Some were openly warm. Others were politely baffled. A few society matrons looked down their noses, their smiles not reaching their eyes. Through it all, Bayo was a rock. His pride in her was a visible shield. The real test came when a well-known society columnist, a woman with a razor-sharp smile, approached. Chief Adeyemi, a magnificent evening. And who is your charming companion? The pause was deliberate, the insinuation clear. Bayo's smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned to steel. Good evening, Neka. This is Amaka, my fiancée. The word echoed through the immediate vicinity.
Fiancé.
Gasps were quickly covered up by coughs. The columnist's eyes nearly bulged out of her head. Your fiancé. What wonderful news. We had no idea. We've been keeping it private, Bayo said, his tone making it clear the interrogation was over. He led Amaka away, leaving a ripple of stunned whispers in their wake. He looked down at her, a mischievous glint in his eye. There, the worst is over. The news will be in every paper tomorrow. Amaka looked up at him, at this man who was publicly staking his entire reputation on his love for her. The fear didn't vanish, but it was overshadowed by a surge of such powerful love and pride that it took her breath away. He wasn't just introducing his girlfriend, he was announcing his future wife. She stood a little taller. She smiled a little brighter. When the next person was introduced, she extended her hand first. Hello, I'm Amaka. She was no longer just meeting his world. She was claiming her place in it, on his arm as his equal. And for the first time, she truly believed she deserved to be there. The gala had been a trial by fire, and they had emerged not just unscathed, but victorious. The society pages the next day were a mix of shock, speculation, and grudging admiration for the mysterious beauty who had tamed Lagos's most eligible bachelor. But for Bayo and Amaka, the public declaration was just the beginning. The most important approvals were yet to be sought. A week after the gala, Bayo found Amaka in the kitchen, helping the chef prepare a new soup recipe. He leaned against the doorway, watching her for a moment, a soft smile on his face. The sight of her there, comfortable and confident in what was now truly her home, filled him with a profound sense of rightness. Amaka, he said, a word? She wiped her hands on a towel and followed him into his study. He closed the door, his expression turning uncharacteristically nervous. The world knows now, he began, pacing slightly. But there are two very important people whose opinion matters more than any newspapers. Amaka knew immediately who he meant. Her heart swelled with love for this man who understood that winning her was not enough. He had to win her children completely. Keen and Connie. He nodded. I do not wish to simply assume my place. I want their blessing. Officially. The following Saturday, Bayo orchestrated his plan with the precision of a corporate takeover, but with infinitely more heart. He told the twins he needed their help with a top-secret mission, which involved them being dressed in their best clothes, tiny little igbatas he had secretly tailored for them. He led them into the grand living room, which had been transformed. Their cardboard spaceship was there, but it was now surrounded by a fantastical landscape of pillows and blankets meant to represent Planet Zuma. A banner they had painted together weeks ago hung proudly on the wall. The twins' eyes were wide with wonder. Oga, you remembered the mission, Keen exclaimed. This is the most important mission yet, Bayo said solemnly, kneeling down so he was at their eye level. His heart was pounding. He had faced down hostile boardrooms and international mergers with less trepidation. I need to ask you both a very serious question. He took a small, velvet box from his pocket. He didn't open it. Instead, he held it in his palm. You know, I care for your mother very much. And I care for you both very much. You have made my house a home, and my life full of joy. Connie tilted her head. Are you going to be our new daddy? The directness of the question stole his breath for a second. He looked from her earnest face to Keen's curious one. That is what I wish to ask you. If I marry your mother, that is what I will become. Your father. I may not be the father you were born with, but I promise to love you, protect you, and play cheetah tag with you for the rest of my life. He took a deep breath. So I must ask, Kenichukwu, Kanyanachi, do I have your permission to ask your mother to be my wife? He held out the box. This was the moment. Their blessing was the only one he truly needed. Keen looked at the box, then at Bayo's face. His little brow furrowed in concentration. Will you read us stories every night? He negotiated. Promise, Bayo said, his voice thick. And will you let us have a puppy? Connie added, her eyes shining. Bayo chuckled, a tear threatening to escape, a very small, very quiet one. The twins looked at each other, having a silent conversation only they understood. Then, they turned back to him and nodded in unison, their faces breaking into wide smiles. Yes, Oga Giant, you can be our daddy. The relief and joy that flooded Bayo was more powerful than any business success he had ever known. He pulled them both into a tight hug, his heart feeling like it might burst. Just then, Amaka, who had been coincidentally summoned by Mrs. Chitty, walked into the room. She stopped, taking in the scene. The transformed room, her beaming children, and Bayo on one knee, now holding them in his arms. Amaka, Bayo said, his voice resonating with love and certainty. He gently released the twins and stood, opening the velvet box. Inside was a breathtaking ring, a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones that sparkled like a constellation. He got down on one knee again, this time before her. The gesture was old-fashioned, heartfelt, and utterly sincere. Amaka Nwachukwu, he began, his eyes glistening. You and your children have given me the greatest treasures I have ever known. Love, laughter, and a family. You have shown me that my greatest achievement will not be a company or a fortune, but the life we build together. He took the ring from the box. I love you with all that I am. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me be a husband to you and a father to these two amazing children? Tears of joy streamed down Amaka's face. She looked at Keen and Connie, who were hopping up and down with excitement, nodding vigorously. Yes, she cried, her voice full of emotion. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol, a key to their future. He stood and kissed her, a kiss that held the promise of 1,000 tomorrows. The twins, unable to contain their excitement any longer, launched themselves at their parents' legs, wrapping them in a group hug. The room, once a cold, formal space for entertaining strangers, was now filled with the sounds of laughter, happy tears, and the joyful chaos of a family being born. Bayo looked around at the three of them, his family, and knew he was the richest man in the world. The proposal was complete. He had secured the deal of a lifetime. The wedding of Chief Adebayo Adeyemi and Amaka Nwachukwu was the social event of the decade, but for the two people at its heart, it was a profoundly intimate affair. It was a fusion of two worlds, two cultures, two souls becoming one. The ceremony was a beautiful blend of Yoruba and Igbo traditions, held on the sprawling lawn of the Ikoyi mansion, which was no longer a cold monument but a home waiting to be filled with love. Brightly colored aso oak and aquite fabrics adorned everything, a vibrant tapestry of their union. The air hummed with the melodic blend of talking drums and the rhythmic beat of the Igbo orchestra. Bayo stood under the flower-decked canopy, resplendent in a cream-colored agbada embroidered with gold. He looked more nervous than he had on the day he took his company public, his eyes constantly searching for her. Then the music shifted. The processional began. First came Keen and Connie, now officially his ring-bearers. They walked down the aisle with serious, important expressions. Keen holding the pillow with the rings, Connie scattering petals from a little basket. They were dressed in miniature versions of Bayo's outfit, and the sight of them, so proud and beloved, brought a mist to his eyes. And then she appeared. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered guests. Amaka was a vision. She wore a breathtaking white lace iro and buba, intricately embroidered with pearls and silver thread, a masterpiece of modern and traditional design. Her veil was a delicate flow of tulle, and on her head sat an elegant gelly that framed her radiant face. She carried a bouquet of white orchids and stephanotis, but her true beauty was in her smile, a luminous, joyful thing that outshone the diamond on her finger. She was not given away. She walked herself, a symbol of her own strength and journey, her head held high, but her eyes were fixed only on Bayo, and his on her. In that moment, the crowd, the opulence, the music, it all faded away. There was only them. They said their vows in both English and Yoruba, promising to love and cherish each other. When it was time for the wine-carrying ceremony, Amaka, with grace and confidence, found the hidden cup of wine among the bridesmaids and offered it to her husband, proving herself a wise and discerning wife to the cheers of the crowd. The Igba music swelled as they danced back up the aisle together, followed by their beaming children, now officially Chief Adebayo Adeyemi Jr. and Kanyonachi Adeyemi. The mansion's walls, once silent, now echoed with the joyous sounds of celebration, laughter, and music. The reception was a feast. Long tables groaned under the weight of both Yoruba and Igbo delicacies. Pounded yam with egusi soup sat next to ofansala and jollof rice. The cake was a magnificent 5-tiered masterpiece, topped with figurines not just of a bride and groom, but of a bride, a groom, and 2 smiling twins. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Bayo stood to make a speech. He tapped his glass, and the crowd fell silent. "Many of you know me as a businessman," he began, his voice strong and clear. "You have seen me build companies and acquire assets. But today, I stand before you not as a CEO, but simply as a man, the luckiest man alive." He reached for Amaka's hand, drawing her to his side. "For years, I believed my legacy would be made of steel and glass and profit margins. I built a house, but it was not a home. It was empty." He looked down at her, his love for her shining in his eyes. Then Amaka arrived. She did not knock down my walls with force. She disarmed them with kindness. She illuminated them with laughter, and she filled them with the most precious sounds in the world, the sounds of a family. He looked over at Keen and Connie, who were watching him with adoration. She brought with her 2 of the most brilliant, courageous young souls I have ever known. They have allowed me the incredible privilege of being their father. He raised his glass, his gaze sweeping over the guests before returning to his wife. "So today, I do not celebrate a merger or an acquisition. I celebrate a miracle. I celebrate love. I celebrate my wife, Amaka, and our children. They are my greatest legacy. Please raise your glasses with me. To my family." The toast was echoed by everyone present, a resounding, joyful affirmation. As the band struck up a slow tune, Bayo led Amaka to the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. He held her close, his hand resting on the small of her back, her head nestled against his shoulder. They swayed together, lost in their own world. "Are you happy, Mrs. Adeyemi?" he whispered into her hair. Amaka leaned back to look at him, her eyes sparkling with tears of joy. "I am home, Bayo," she whispered back. "I am finally home." Around them, the party continued, a vibrant, joyful celebration of their love. But the true celebration was in their quiet embrace, in the way Keen and Connie ran over to hug their legs in the middle of the dance, creating a laughing, 4-person huddle. The mighty Chief Adebayo Adeyemi was no longer a man of solitude. He was a husband, a father, a man surrounded by the chaotic, beautiful, loving noise of his family. And as he held them all close, he knew that his story, once a tale of lonely success, had finally found its perfect, happy ending. The wedding was over, but their beautiful life together had just begun.